Welcome to the series called Dismantling the Pretendians and Culture Vultures, where we expose non-natives who partake in exploitive pretendian behavior and who have agendas to replace the natives. We got shocking news coming out of Oklahoma. Just like some pretendian hunters in Oklahoma have suspected, the leading attorney for the Creek Nation Freedmen case has revealed his infiltration and looting agenda, which reeks of pretendian and radical reparationist behavior that typically targets the 5 tribes of Oklahoma. Damario Solomon, a leading attorney for the Creek Freedmen case, recently took the case to the Creek Nation Supreme Court and won the case, which allowed all Creek Freedmen with a documented paper trail to enroll as citizens with the same rights and benefits that the by-blood citizens enjoy. Soon after winning the Creek Freedmen case, Solomon finally revealed his true wannabe Aboriginal and Hotep agenda when he spoke to a pretendian and reparationist online crowd. His goal is to rig the Creek Nation enrollment criteria that will allow the floodgates of the Creek Nation to open up, eventually creating a situation that will make the Creek Nation a majority black populous tribal nation, which will make it easier to earmark much of the land, resources, and benefits to black people.
Talk to us about what's been happening with some of the legal work that you've been doing to secure justice for our people.
Yeah, I have great news. As you know and the audience know, we've been working for many years to get the citizenship and benefits for Black Creek Indians, Creeks of African descent, also known as Creek Freedmen. This is something that's been fighting for 46 years. I've been 25 plus years on it, but it's been an issue since 1979. And on July 23rd, a couple of weeks ago, we got a unanimous 5-0 decision from the Muskogee Creek Nation Supreme Court saying that our treaty rights are enforced and Creeks of African descent are entitled to citizenship within the Creek Nation. What that means for people to understand that's about 100,000 Creeks of African descent, those individuals like myself. I'm a Creek of African descent. My family came on a Trail of Tears in the early 1830s from Alabama, walked to Oklahoma.
Unfortunately for Mr. Solomon, the facts and reality are not on his side. His claim that today's Creek Freedmen population totals 100,000 just doesn't add up, especially if we factor in that only 1,600 black folks were enslaved by some Creek Nation citizens. So how can their descendants grow to 100,000 today? That would require each original slave or adoptive person to have 62 children and grandchildren, which is impossible. It's so obvious that Solomon is dreaming up a plot to rig the Creek Nation Constitution to allow anyone who claims to be a Creek Freedman or ancient Black American to enroll, which is just a pretendian infiltration fantasy that will never happen.
Many people, Creeks of African descent, were enslaved by the Creek Nation who adopted European-style economies, including plantations and enslavement of their black members. And Creeks of African descent, many were already here before Europeans came, and others were actually enslaved Africans. But after the Civil War, there are Creeks of African descent that included people that were free, people that were formerly enslaved by the Creek Nation, and the people that was formerly enslaved by the United States and the states who moved over to Indian Territory. And those people had citizenship and freedom and opportunities far greater than almost any other black population in the United States of America.
See, here's the thing. A lot of people don't realize we were here when Columbus got here. There were Black Creeks here when the European came here. We're well documented going back to the 1500s. And so don't try to erase our contribution. Don't try to erase what we've done. Don't try to erase our heroes and sheroes within the nation. Let's move forward as one people and let's talk about how we heal. Obviously, healing includes some type of reparatory.
And Creeks of African descent, many were already here before Europeans came.
I hate to rain on your ancient Black American theory, Mr. Solomon, but there is no DNA, archaeological or anthropological evidence to support your theory. The truth is, there have been tens of thousands of geneticists from around the world who have studied tens of thousands of pre-Columbian indigenous sites from across the Americas. Yet, not one study has yielded any DNA evidence of ancient Black Americans, let alone a Black Creek population 500 years ago. Solomon's ancient Creek of African descent claim is ridiculous. First of all, the first Black people to appear in the southeast portion of North America didn't appear until the early 1500s. They came as slaves or Black conquistadors working with the Hernando de Soto expeditions or with earlier Spanish explorers. Secondly, the Creek people did not exist during the 1500s. That was the ancestral period, as the Creek are the direct descendants of a few Muskogee mound-building nations during the Mississippian culture period. One kingdom called the Coosa are the ancestors of some Creek and Seminole. Damario Solomon is espousing silly, revisionist history. Like that is going to get native Creek people to accept his theory as fact, and another reason to accept the Creek Freedmen. Mr. Solomon didn't need his revisionist history to get a win in the Creek Nation's Supreme Court. All it took was presenting the 1866 treaty to the court, and that got him a win for the Creek Freedmen. So stop with all the silly ancient Black American theories. It's not real Black history.
And in 1979, the Creek Nation decided we don't want you Negroes anymore, quote unquote Negroes, even though we are Creek, right? We are Native, we're indigenous folks. And now we got it back. So I'm truly excited about it. This means healthcare, education benefits, stipends.
Wow.
It means child care, housing benefits, employment preferences, all these things based on being an Indian, which is a political designation, not a racial designation. Very important.
It's so obvious that Mr. Solomon has no respect or interest with the modern-day Creek community and heritage, as he only views the Creek Nation as a ATM machine to get reparations and benefits, which proves that he is only interested in using the Creek Nation to uplift the Black community in the region.
That's the great thing about our particular heritage. We're some of the most documented people in the world because every time they would take the land, they would document who the citizens were, et cetera. And so we do have a lot of that documentation. And, you know, just like first of all, being enslaved by anybody for any amount of time is bad, terrible, and should not happen. But there were different differentiations between the Creek Nation's enslavement system and some of the enslavement systems in the South. And you had differentiation between actual enslavement owners. So some people were very, very lenient. I mean, a lot of times they lived on their own plots of land. They kind of did their own thing. They just had to be like an indentured servant. And then you had the actual just sadistic, brutal, violent enslaved holders, raping people. I mean, so this is another thing, you know, you have a huge population of quote unquote mixed bloods. This whole blood language is European, right? It's Western European language, but just to ground us in the conversation, we have a tremendous amount of quote unquote mixed bloods. What's interesting is when the mixed bloods is white, European, and quote unquote native, that's not as a big of an issue. But when it's native and got dark skin, oh, now we got a big issue. So
here come that melanin again. Always.
Oh man.
Trouble.
Mr. Solomon, the Creek Nation goes by lineage. It don't matter if you are pure native or mixed with white or Black. In 1979, the Muskogee Creek Nation changed their own constitution and adopted by-blood laws, which did remove all adoptees such as the Creek Freedmen from Creek Nation citizenship. This was not an anti-Black agenda move by the Creek Nation. It was a by-blood preservation movement by the Creeks. There were still Afro-Creek and Creek Freedmen who had Creek ancestry who remained Creek Nation citizens, which Attorney Damario Solomon failed to mention because he has an agenda to smear the Creek Nation as anti-Black, as a way to bring the Creek Nation to their knees. Unlike Damario Solomon, there are actually many Creek Freedmen who do want to be part of the Creek community and heritage. But there are also some Creek Freedmen who hold the same sentiments that Solomon has. It's a great win for the Creek Freedmen, but you must come with interests in the Creek community and heritage. If not, there is no reason to enroll into the Creek Nation. Remember, The Creek Nation has already made amends with the freedmen with 160 acres of land that was given to each Creek freedman after the 1866 treaty became federal law.
After the Civil War, you had freedmen living in Oklahoma.
You have a freed Black population able to live on tribal lands in a communal way.
The Dawes Act passed in 1887, allowing the federal government to break up tribal lands into individual plots.
Black people in Oklahoma owned more land than in any other part of the country. About 2 million acres of land were allotted to the freedmen. So when you think about 40 acres and a mule and that false promise after the Civil War, Black people actually got that in Oklahoma.
Those land allotments become the seeds of more than 50 Black towns that emerge in Oklahoma. More than any other state in the country.
Once the 5 tribes received their allotment, then whatever was left, that was deemed surplus, and the government opened it for sale to whoever wanted to buy it.
O.W. Gurley was a Southerner who hailed from Arkansas, who came to Tulsa to purchase land. The land that Greenwood exists on was not land that whites at the time deemed as valuable, but it's land that could be sold to, quote unquote, a Negro buyer. Gurley purchases an allotment of land. His goal was to incubate a Black community.
O.W. Gurley opened a grocery store on what would become Greenwood Avenue. He was really able to tap into a lot of dynamics happening throughout the state where people would be traveling through different communities, and some of the freedmen ended up settling in Greenwood. They were able to provide some of that nurturing wealth.
Land for recently enslaved people is everything, because we have to imagine a world in which an enslaved person did not have property rights in themselves.
In some nations, like the Cherokee and Creek nations, there were actually large factional disputes over the institution of slavery, somewhat similar to like we see in the US. Confederates told the 5 tribes that they would treat them better than the United States did. And so you actually have a battle between the Confederacy and the Union over Native American loyalty. So the Confederates say, we're going to give you congressional representation. We're going to give you a more influential say in governmental affairs. We're going to allow you to keep your land in Indian Territory forever without white settlement. And so these are the things that they're really kind of picking up on as things that the 5 tribes aren't happy about with the United States. Now, would the Confederacy have actually kept these promises? Probably not. After all, the Confederacy was primarily composed of the states that had forced the 5 tribes to move in the first place, these southern states who really wanted them out. But their entreaties were enticing to the 5 tribes, especially for people who wanted to maintain slavery. And so these 5 tribes split over the war, with some members of these tribes fighting for the Union and some members of these tribes fighting for the Confederacy. And this is important because of what comes immediately after the Civil War. So when the war is over, the United States ignores the fact that some tribal members had fought for the Union, and they ignore the fact that they had actually not sent any kind of military support to the 5 tribes. Instead, they use the fact that some members of the 5 tribes fought for the Confederacy against them. So they point to this alliance with the Confederacy as behavior that was deserving of punishment, and they claim that they were going to stop all of their former treaties made with the 5 tribes unless they created a new treaty. And so they're withholding things from them like monies that are very necessary in this post-war period to rebuild. And they do this until the 5 tribes agree to new treaties, which we know as the Treaties of 1866, because this is when they are ratified. And so these treaties serve as the 5 tribes' official surrender from the war, but also as their reconstruction documents. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So one of the most extreme items in these treaties is the cession of land. And so the 5 tribes have, come from the southeast on the Trail of Tears, moved to this new place. All this land is supposed to be theirs. Now, only about 30 years later, they are giving it up again to the United States, some of this land. But the other important items in these treaties are related to Black people. And so the United States has the 5 tribes emancipate the enslaved people in their nations, adopt them as citizens, and give them land. And the Chickasaw and Choctaw Nation specifically had to give their former slaves 40 acres of land. Now, most of you know the significance of 40 acres. This is what African Americans in the United States fought for and did not receive. This is a number, a phrase, still used in the Black community to talk about reparations and how the American government failed African Americans. But these are Black people who actually received it. Now, this is the United States coming into 5 other nations, Indian nations that are supposed to be sovereign in any other way. They're supposed to be able to decide their tribal membership. They're supposed to be able to make their own laws, almost everything that any other sovereign nation would be able to do. And the United States is telling them, you have to make these changes because we say so. Now, is this legally right? No. Well, Black people were actually being used in a way as a tool to weaken Native nations' right to make their own decisions about tribal membership and governance. The Cherokee Nation had ordered emancipation in 1863, along with the U.S. with the Emancipation Proclamation. And so they were the only one of the 5 tribes to actually emancipate without direct coercion. But without U.S. intervention, we don't know if the other tribes would have ever emancipated their slaves. And so these freedoms, these rights, and especially this land, put the former slaves of the 5 tribes on a different plane than African Americans in the United States. It gave them different opportunities. And these opportunities are why so many Black people from the United States flocked to Indian Territory after emancipation. This Black migration is why Oklahoma Black towns exist, and it's why Black Wall Street existed. Now, I know many people just learned about the Tulsa Massacre thanks to Watchmen or Lovecraft Country, but these shows and even a lot of the articles that follow them trying to kind of explain this event miss this deeper history of the region. African Americans came from the South to Indian Territory and later to Oklahoma because the United States had forced Indian nations to recognize Black rights and to give them a sort of reparations. They had forced Indian nations to do something that they themselves were unwilling to do. And so we can only truly understand the Tulsa Massacre if we know about and understand the Black and Native people who lived in Tulsa and the broader region before. Now, what I argue in my new book is that even though life in Indian Territory was not perfect for Black people, there was no large-scale white violence, and there was no large-scale attack on their right to vote, for example. And so Black people are serving on juries and voting and building homes and communities in Indian Territory through the 1890s, while African Americans in the South have seen their ability to exercise their rights and live freely really decimated by this point. At the same time, as they moved, these Black migrants sometimes brought with them negative and harmful ideas about Native Americans. And these are ideas that they've taken from whites. For example, many African American leaders, including Frederick Douglass, spoke about how Native Americans were uncivilized. And so he argued that Black settlement in places like Indian Territory would improve the West. Now this, in effect, was promoting colonization. This was not living in kind with Indian brothers and sisters. This was not advocating for a multiracial democracy, but rather this was disparaging Native people to argue that Native Americans were not the ideal residents of the West, but instead African Americans were, because they were more willing to assimilate to white American culture. And so Black settlement in Indian Territory is more complicated than the celebratory narrative of, say, Black Wall Street. Some Black people bought into and disseminated racially prejudiced ideas about Native people. And some Native people adopted chattel slavery and anti-Blackness. But these were 2 groups, Native people and Black people, who were both trying to survive, both trying to win at an unwinnable game of succeeding in a white supremacist society.
Another group of people also seek sanctuary among the Seminoles. Blacks, fleeing the horrors of slavery in the United States. In Spanish Florida, the runaway slaves join other blacks working and living with the Indians.
It became quite a thing to flee into Florida by the hundreds, and it was quite productive. They could raise crops right next to the Indians. They married Indians. They became a part of the frontier. They raised their families. They raised their grandchildren, and they died right here in Florida.
What's more, there is the burning issue that refuses to die: slavery. Many slaveholders fear that the presence of escaped blacks in Florida will incite slave insurrections. Whites are permitted to search the reservation for runaways. Often, they steal away blacks who have never even been slaves. But the Seminoles will not betray their allies and friends, and the blacks are determined to stay free.
This had been like a piece of heaven to them. They had built, they had harvested, they had reared their children, and here were a group of people coming in saying that we own you.
Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, a handful of families in each tribe intermarried and traded comfortably with Europeans. They abandoned tradition and were more comfortable speaking English than their native languages. They owned plantations and slaves and sent their children to school in Paris, London, or Charleston. In the upside-down history of the times, they emerged as leaders of our tribes because they could speak English and were comfortable in the halls of Congress. But in 1812, with tribal lands overrun by settlers, a movement for the defense of land and culture caught fire among the thousands of Muskogee Creek who had continued to live traditional lives. Led by Red Eagle and Manawi, the movement came to be known as the Red Sticks because of the crimson paint on their war clubs. They also opposed slavery and sheltered runaway slaves from plantations throughout the South. They waged war on frontier settlements.
But nothing strengthens their bond more than a common enemy: the white Americans. Southern slaveholders are angry that blacks are escaping to Spanish Florida. What especially galls them is the existence of a small fort 60 miles from Georgia on the Apalachicola River. Known as the Negro Fort, it is manned by runaway slaves. This infuriates General Andrew Jackson.
You have a citizenship process. You have to actually go and affirmatively apply. So we have had hundreds and hundreds of our members already applying. And I would tell anyone that's listening, if you believe you're a Creek of African descent or want to find out if you're a Creek of African descent, go to justiceforblackcreeks.com.
If you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Check out other related content in the links provided. Thanks for watching.